Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In his famous lecture, What is Metaphysics?, Martin Heidegger talks about the nothing, and he coins a term for the activity or the agency, we might say, of the nothing, what it does metaphysically in terms of the world of beings, the entire environment that we are surrounded by, and the kind of being that we are, human being, Dasein. He uses a term that's in German, nichten, which is a verb coined from nichts, right? Which is nothing, and nichtet is the third person singular of it. So he tells us that the nothings, we translate this generally in English by nihilates, using the Latin nihil, right? And this means that it's what the nothing actually does. Now you might say, how can anything come from nothing? Well, that's a topic that we're going to explore elsewhere. The nothing has a kind of agency that turns out to be fundamental, according to Heidegger. And he tells us two things about the ways in which human being experiences and participates in the nihilitative behavior of the nothing, or the nihilitative effects of the nothing. As a matter of fact, he also tells us, this is something really quite important, that, here we go, that this nihilitative behavior, the possibilities of it are ways in which Dasein bears what he calls its thrownness. They're ways in which we are placed in the world. So it's not just that the nothing does something that we experience the effects of. We, you might say, collaborate not only with being, but also with the nothing in certain types of, I'm tempted to say negative, but really Heidegger wants to insist on this term, nihilitative behavior. He also tells us that this pervades not only all thought, but all being because of us. He talks about the saturation of existence by nihilitative behavior. And he tells us that it testifies to the constant, though doubtless obscured manifestations of the nothing that only anxiety originally reveals. So that this is quite important. Now, Heidegger is going to tell us two things that's really key in this respect. He's going to, once again, talk about the relationship between the nothing and the not and negation, and you might say arrange things in such a way that our role and the role of the nothing becomes more clear, the priority of the nothing. And then he's going to name off 5 types of nihilitive behavior. These by no means exhaust them. There's plenty of other ways in which nihilitive behavior, as we just said, pervades the whole of existence and allows beings to even be. But these are 5 that he names, and they're quite interesting. So let's start by talking first about the relationship between the nothing and negation. So Heidegger says that the nihilation of the nothing is what allows negation to occur. And he says that negation does not conjure the not out of itself as a means for making distinctions and oppositions in whatever is given, inserting itself, as it were, in between what is given. So it's not the case that first we have being, And then we have a type of being, human being, which has an intellect capable of making distinctions, among those distinctions being the one, the primary one of negation, saying not to things, and then afterwards inserting all of these. Instead, there's something that's been missing in this discussion. First, it's not that first being is given and then the nothing comes in afterwards as a reflection of, or as an abstraction from negation. Rather, the nothing is what allows negation to occur in the first place. He says, how can negation produce the not from itself when it can make denials only when something deniable is already granted to it, only when being already is there to confront it. So I can say, okay, not this, not a book, not a tie, not a nice day, not a crane operator, whatever we want to do. We have to have something there in place. And so negation wouldn't get started off the ground if that was the case. So he says, no, the not can become manifest only when its origin, the nihilation of the nothing in general, and therewith the nothing itself, is disengaged from concealment. The nothing has been there the entire time. Throughout the history of human being, throughout the history of metaphysics, it's always there, haunting being, ready to be shown, appropriated, engaged with, even though we can only do so to a limited extent. So he says, negation is also only one way of annihilating, right? We negate by way of the not, which is supplied to us, not simply by our intellect, but from the nothing. Our intellect definitely plays an important role in it. Logic definitely can be constructed and applied to, we think, the totality of beings and our entire existence. Turns out that's not completely true, but that is something that we can do. Heidegger stresses, however, this is only one way of annihilating. Now notice that when the negation is taking place, this is a form of annihilation that is occurring through human being, through Dasein. Not just the nothing doing what it does, but us and the nothing together in relation to being. What are some of the other types? Heidegger names them off, and these are just the translations of them. But, you can get this across in whatever you think about. Unyielding antagonism, stinging rebuke, galling failure, merciless prohibition, and most difficult to bear of all, he says, bitter privation. Notice that he has an adjective qualifying each of these. We could strip the adjectives off and we could just have antagonism, rebuke, failure, prohibition, privation. So you might ask yourself, why does he have these adjectives there? To lend them a certain sort of definiteness, to drive them home. What is he driving home? He's trying to show us, by using these vivid examples, that these are not reducible to negation. There's, you might say, a different sort of not. It's not just merely the contrast, not that, not that. There's something else happening with these. Not just something purely subjective, you might say an add-on by the human being so that antagonism would be in some way reducible to negation and we're just adding in some filters or something like that. As a matter of fact, privation is a really great example. Within certain classical logics, privation was understood as being something different than, say, denial. Right? Aristotle talks about this in the Categories and in the Metaphysics. This is a very important point. Other great thinkers of Heidegger's own time, like Maurice Blondel, will focus in on this. So he says these are possibilities of nihilative behavior. These pervade existence, right? So unyielding antagonism, he says, stinging rebuke have a more abysmal source than the measured negation of thought. What is the more abysmal? The nothing, right? Galling failure and merciless prohibition require some deeper answer. The nothing is the deeper answer. Bitter privation is more burdensome. If we think very briefly about what these are like, we're also going to see another thing that Heidegger is not quite bringing out because he's just sort of passing through these on the way through to talking about other things. Antagonism requires something different than mere negation. We can be antagonistic only towards something else that we accord a kind of agency towards. That doesn't mean that it has to be a person. It could be an animal. It could even be inanimate objects or the environment. As, for example, when the wind is blowing on us and the sun is beaming down on us and we're getting irritated about it because we have to get somewhere and it's messing up our clothes and our hair, and we feel, a sense of antagonism towards it. Of course, we can't hurt those natural phenomena, but there is something going on there. The way in which we are relating ourselves to being through the nothing, through the nihilation of the nothing, is a nihilative behavior that we are bringing to it. Stinging rebuke, again, something that is possible between people or other things that we want to rebuke it when we're personifying them. Galling failure is, you might say, something on the part of Dasein, interpreting its own actions as failures, looking at itself as a failure. It can also be coming in from the outside, how, our best laid plans go astray. And that is not the same thing as negation either. As a matter of fact, negation is kind of tame compared to these. Merciless prohibition. This is a very interesting one. We receive prohibitions, or we give prohibitions, again, within a world of agency. And then bitter privation. As I remarked just a moment ago, privation is not always understood as simply a form of negating something. Privation is privation of what ought to be there, what is missing. And we can go on and add all sorts of other things. Absence, for example, is not the same thing as negation. Betrayal would be another form of nihilative behavior. The point is, all of these are things which we bring to the environing world in which we find ourselves of beings, and of being with a capital B. We do not do so only through our own agency. We do so in relation to the nothing. And so each of these forms of nihilative behavior can be traced back to the nothing. You might say we are co-causes or collaborators in the carrying out a kind of labor within being that allows being to be what it is. Being would not be what it is without all these forms of negation going on. Rather, not negation, but nihilation. You see how easy it is to slip back into this old pattern of thinking about all of these in terms of negation. Once again, I'll just say this to bring this to a close. Heidegger wants to stress to us that all of these are irreducible to each other, and all of them are forms of nihilative behavior.